I still remember the way her voice sounded calm, sharp, and oddly proud when she leaned across the table and said, "You're nothing without my son." And the worst part, he just stood there. He said nothing. 3 months ago, I was planning my wedding. Today, I'm sitting in a friend's spare bedroom staring at apartment listings on my phone, wondering how I got here. When I met Brett in 2021, it felt like meeting someone who just got me. We clicked almost instantly. Same humor, same love for obscure documentaries, same idea of a good Friday night pizza and true crime reruns. 6 months in, we were inseparable. By the time we moved in together a year later, I genuinely believed he might be the one I met his parents not long after we started living together. His dad, Walt, was kind in a quiet, almost detached way. But Susan, his mom, was something else. She asked me question after question where my parents worked, where I went to school, who I knew. Her smile never quite reached her eyes, and when I mentioned my dad worked construction and my mom was a school aide, her expression twitched just for a second. Brett brushed it off later. "She's just old-fashioned," he said. "She comes from a family that values connections." But I don't care about that stuff, he promised, and I believed him because love makes you believe a lot of things. When he proposed last fall during a weekend trip upstate at this cozy little B&B, I said yes through tears. I thought we were going to build a life together. We agreed on a modest wedding, nothing big or flashy since we were saving for a house. But everything changed after we announced our engagement. Susan immediately inserted herself into every decision. At first, I thought she was trying to help. She had contacts with vendors offered to coordinate because I worked long hours. But her suggestions became demands. The venue I loved was too shabby. The food I picked wasn't right for their guests. The dress I fell in love with was a bit cheap looking, don't you think? Brett's response? "It's easier to go along with her than argue." I started giving in just to keep the peace, but it felt like dying by 1,000 paper cuts. Then came that dinner, just a few months before the wedding. Susan had invited two of her friends, Rita and Angela. I didn't realize at first that the entire dinner was a performance for their approval. Rita asked where I summered as a child. I laughed. I thought she was kidding. When I explained that my family camped at state parks or visited grandma in Ohio, the whole table fell silent. After dinner, I was helping clean up in the kitchen when Susan cornered me. She started reminiscing out of nowhere about Brett's ex-girlfriend, Melissa. How Melissa's family had a home in the Hamptons. How she fit in. And then just like that, she dropped the pretense. She said I was nice enough but not refined, not right for Brett, that I didn't know how to entertain important people or mingle in the right circles, that my background would embarrass him someday. I couldn't breathe. When I told her she was being incredibly rude, she laughed. Not loud, just this quiet, smug chuckle. Then she said, "See, you're proving my point with this emotional outburst. I don't want Brett to waste his life being dragged down by someone ordinary." I walked out, told Brett we needed to leave. In the car, I was shaking, crying, still trying to make sense of what had just happened. And Brett, he got quiet, too quiet, he said. Maybe I'd misunderstood. Maybe she didn't mean it like that. He wasn't angry. He wasn't shocked. He was defensive of her. That was our first real fight. I told him what she said, every word. And his response? "She's just worried about our future." He actually admitted she'd been expressing doubts about me for months. My heart cracked right there in the car, and over the next 2 weeks, everything fell apart. He started coming home late, making vague comments about our differences, suddenly worried that I might not fit in at company events, that raising kids with different values could be a challenge. Then came the second dinner. He begged me to go, said his mom wanted to apologize. I was an idiot. I went. There was no apology. Just more comments about my clothes, my manners, even the way I spoke. When Brett stepped outside to take a call, Susan leaned in and with that same flat tone said, "You're nothing without my son. He can do so much better." I started crying. She rolled her eyes. "See," she said, "you just proved my point." That night I gave Brett a choice. Either we go no contact with your mother or there's no wedding. He looked at me and said, "Maybe she's right." So I took off the engagement ring, placed it gently on the dashboard, and asked him to drop me at my friend Angela's place. He didn't even try to stop me. The first morning after I left, I woke up on Angela's pull-out couch and instinctively reached for Brett. My hand touched a pillow, cold, empty. That's when the memory hit me again. Not a dream, not a nightmare I could wake up from, just real life now. Angela didn't ask many questions. She didn't need to. I think she saw it in my face, the kind of tired that goes deeper than sleep. She just made coffee, handed me a mug and said, "You don't have to figure everything out today, But that was the problem. I didn't know how to do anything anymore. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. My body just existed. I lost 10 pounds without trying. Angela started leaving protein bars on the coffee table like she was feeding a ghost. I'd stare at apartment listings for hours, scrolling mindlessly without actually calling anyone. I wasn't ready to move again. Not emotionally, not physically. Something about finding a new place felt final, like admitting that Brett was never going to come back, that the life I thought I was building was over, and Brett, he stayed quiet at first. Then a few days later, I got a text, not a real apology, just a, I'm confused right now, I need time to think. Time to think, after 3 years together, that's all he could give me. I told him the truth, that there was nothing to think about. That love isn't supposed to feel like a negotiation. You don't pause someone's heart while you figure it out, he replied. Maybe let's just take a break until after this work project wraps up, then we can reassess. Reassess, like I was a quarterly report. That was the moment something inside me broke, not loudly, not with fire, but with a quiet sort of surrender, like a balloon deflating slowly. I didn't block him, but I stopped replying. Instead, I threw myself into work, arrived early, stayed late, took on projects that weren't mine. It wasn't about ambition, it was about distraction. It gave me something to do, somewhere to be. It gave me permission to not feel anything, because as long as I was needed, I wasn't irrelevant. My team lead started noticing, "You've been killing it lately," she said one afternoon, handing me a new assignment. "Whatever you're doing, keep going." She didn't know I was using work like morphine. One evening, about a month in, Angela came home and found me curled up on the couch, still in my work clothes, just staring at the blank TV screen. She sat next to me, didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, "You don't have to be okay yet, but you can't stay here forever. Not in this space. You deserve a home again, even a little one." She was right. 3 days later, we went to see a tiny apartment her friend had just vacated. It wasn't much, 1-bedroom, tiny kitchen, no dishwasher, but it was affordable, close to work, and most importantly, it was mine. I signed the lease that day. Moving in was bittersweet. I had left most of my furniture behind at Brett's place. I didn't have the energy to fight for any of it. Angela and her boyfriend helped me make a trip to IKEA. We got the essentials, a bed, a couch, a small table that doubled as a desk. But for weeks, the apartment didn't feel like a home. It was just a place to exist. Some nights I'd lie awake listening to the hum of the fridge, the quiet traffic outside, and I'd wonder, how did I get here? How did someone who loved me so deeply let go so easily? One Saturday afternoon, I ran into Nick, Brett's younger brother, at the grocery store. I almost ducked behind the cereal display, but he spotted me. He looked awkward, nervous even, but he came over and said, "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything." My mom was way out of line, and I argued with her for what it's worth. I didn't know what to say. No one from that family had ever acknowledged what I went through. Not really. So I just nodded and said, "Thank you." Before walking away, he said something else. "Brett's not doing great. I'm not saying that to guilt you. Just thought you should know I didn't ask for details. I didn't want to know. I wasn't ready to care." But that night, I thought about how different things had become. How much of myself I'd lost, trying to be enough for a family that never saw my worth. I wasn't angry anymore, just empty. And maybe that was the first sign I was starting to heal. Not by doing anything extraordinary, just by surviving the day. The first time I laughed, like really laughed after everything was at a party I almost didn't go to. It was hosted by an old college roommate, just a casual get-together with too many chips and bad wine. I was going to skip it, curl up with Netflix, and avoid human interaction like usual, but Angela practically shoved me out the door. "You need to remember how to be a person again," she said, handing me my jacket. I rolled my eyes, but I went, and that's where I met Matt. He wasn't flashy, no expensive suit, no networking energy, no fake charm, just normal, a little shy, kind eyes. We ended up in the same conversation circle, talking about movies and terrible first dates. He asked for my number at the end of the night, and I surprised myself by giving it to him. Our first date was a coffee shop on a Sunday afternoon. No pressure, no expectations, just two people talking. And for the first time in months, I forgot about Brett. Matt didn't ask too many questions. He didn't try to fix me. He just listened. And when I told him the short version of the breakup story, he didn't say, "Wow, that's crazy," or try to analyze it. He just said, "That must have been really painful. I'm glad you're here now." That simple sentence stuck with me. I'm glad you're here now. Not where I've been, not who I used to be, just here. Around the same time, something unexpected happened at work. There was a company restructure, and a new position opened up a leadership role on a cross-functional team. It came with more hours, more stress, and a decent raise. My manager pulled me aside and said, I know things have been rough, but you've stepped up. You've earned this. At first, I hesitated. The old version of me, the one who lived in the shadow of someone else's approval, would have doubted whether I was qualified, whether I was enough. But this new version of me, she applied and got the job. The raise wasn't life-changing, but it meant I could finally stop panicking about rent. I started rebuilding my emergency fund slowly. Each deposit into my account felt like another piece of myself coming back. Matt and I kept seeing each other slowly, intentionally. There were no games, no mixed signals. He'd come over and help me hang artwork. One weekend, we installed a floating shelf together for my books. They weren't grand gestures, but they made my apartment feel like home. One afternoon, I ran into Rita. Yes, that Rita, Susan's friend at the mall. She spotted me coming out of a store with a suit bag and gave me this over-the-top smile. We made awkward small talk, then, casually, she dropped it. Did you hear about Brett? Poor thing. Lost his job. The big project tanked. Melissa dumped him again, too. She said it like she was offering me a slice of gossip cake. I just nodded and said, hope he figures things out. But inside, I felt nothing. Not anger, not joy, just detachment. A few days later, Matt and I were out at dinner when I saw her, Susan, across the restaurant sitting with Walt and another couple. Our eyes met. I braced myself. But instead of looking away, she actually walked over. Hi, darling, she said, like we were old friends, like she hadn't told me I was a burden, a mistake, a threat to her son's success. She asked about my job, complimented my outfit, and when I introduced Matt, I swear her smile tightened. She left us with, everyone misses you. I hope we can talk sometime. Matt was polite but confused. When I explained who she was, he just nodded and said, she seems intense. That night, I got a Facebook message from Brett, actually, no, from Angela, who had forwarded me a screenshot of Brett messaging her, asking about me. He wanted to know if I was seeing anyone, if I ever talked about him, if maybe I missed him. She didn't respond, and I didn't either. But inside, I felt a shift, like a rope that had been tied around my chest had finally gone slack. I was no longer waiting for his version of closure. I was writing my own. And maybe that was the point. Closure doesn't always come from someone else. Sometimes it's just waking up one day and realizing you don't miss the chaos anymore. The voicemail caught me off guard. It came from an unknown number. I almost deleted it without listening. Probably just another spam call about my car warranty, but something made me play it. It was Susan. Her voice cracked under the weight of what I can only describe as desperation. She said she needed to talk about Brett, about mistakes, about regret. I didn't return the call, but I couldn't stop thinking about it either. Matt noticed. He always notices. We were watching a movie when I absentmindedly checked my phone again. He muted the TV. Do you want to talk about it? So I told him about the message, about the woman who once told me I wasn't good enough now, suddenly needing my help, and instead of reacting, instead of offering advice. Matt just asked, what would give you peace? That question stayed with me. 3 days later, I sent a text to that unfamiliar number. What's going on? 5 minutes later, my phone rang. It wasn't Brett. It was Susan. Apparently, she'd been using his phone because I had her blocked. She launched into an apology, the kind that feels rehearsed but also strangely sincere. She admitted she'd misjudged me, that she'd been harsh, classist, controlling, that she'd pushed me away because she was trying to protect her son from what she thought was wrong for him. And now she needed me because Brett was spiraling. He'd lost his job, his savings, he was drinking too much, sleeping until noon, refusing help. He listens to you, she said. He was always better when he was with you. I stayed quiet for a long time. Then I told her I was sorry. Brett was struggling, but I wasn't the solution. She asked to meet just coffee. Matt was concerned, and honestly, so was I, but I agreed. Not for closure, not out of curiosity, just to say the things I'd left unsaid. We met at a quiet cafe on a Saturday morning. Susan looked tired. Her usual polish was gone, her hair in a rushed ponytail, eyes puffy. She'd ordered my favorite drink. The small detail gave me chills, because it meant Brett had told her she'd remembered. For an hour, she laid it all out, how Brett had blown through his savings, how he'd maxed out credit cards, how he was refusing therapy, how he blamed her, then blamed himself, then circled back to blaming the world. She didn't ask me to take him back, at least not directly, but she hinted. He was at his best with you. You always kept him grounded. You were so good for him, and then the line that made my skin crawl, you're exactly what he needs right now. That was when I realized what this really was. I was no longer beneath her son. Now I was useful, not because I changed, but because he had fallen. I left the cafe feeling hollow, not vindicated, not satisfied, just done. The calls kept coming. At first, polite check ins, then daily voicemails, then desperate ones talking about Brett's drinking his father, threatening to cut him off, her wanting to make peace with my parents. One evening, Nick texted me. He apologized again for his mother. He said Brett was getting worse, and he told me something I needed to hear. None of this is your responsibility. Matt and I were slowly building something real, quiet, steady. We talked about maybe moving in together when his lease ended. His calm energy was everything. Susan's chaos wasn't. Then one day, Susan crossed a line. She showed up at my workplace. I was walking to my car when I saw her waiting by the lot, clutching a folder. Inside was Brett's resume. "Can you put in a word for him?" she asked. I was stunned. I told her firmly that this was not okay, that she needed to stop, that Brett was an adult, that he needed to fix his own life. She cried in public. In front of my coworkers, it was humiliating and heartbreaking because a part of me still remembered the version of myself who once wanted so badly to be accepted by this woman. Back at home, Matt held my hand and said, "You handled that with so much grace." And that night, I realized I was done. The next morning, I called Susan calmly. Clearly, I told her that if she contacted me again, I'd report it as harassment, that I wasn't coming back, that I forgave her, but I wouldn't be part of her family's cleanup crew. And then I said something I didn't know I'd needed to say until it left my lips. Maybe if you had raised your son to value character over connections, he wouldn't be where he is now. Then I hung up and blocked her number for the last time. The knock came on a Friday night. Matt and I were just finishing dinner, quiet, cozy laughter still lingering between us when it echoed through the apartment. I opened the door. And there he was, Brett. He looked like a shell of the man I once loved. Disheveled, pale eyes glassy. Susan stood just behind him, hovering anxiously, clutching her purse like it held salvation. I didn't say anything at first, I just stared. The moment felt suspended like a thread still tethering me to a life I had already left behind. Then Matt stepped up behind me. "Who's at the door?" Brett's eyes shifted to him, and for a brief second, I saw it, regret, realization, maybe even shame. He tried to speak, said something about how much he missed me, how he'd made a mistake, how he wished he'd stood up for me when it mattered. Susan jumped in. Of course she did, talking about how good we were together, how people make mistakes, how love deserves a second chance. I didn't invite them in. I stepped outside, closed the door behind me, and looked at Brett. He started to say more, but I stopped him. "Showing up like this, it's not okay. You don't get to do this." He looked at Susan, then back at me and said something that caught me completely off guard. "This is why I didn't want to come. I told her this would make it worse." Then he turned to her, voice tight with frustration. "You don't get to fix this. I messed it up. Stop trying to fix everything." And then he apologized. Not for losing me, not for being weak, but for not protecting me back then. And now I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I just nodded and said, "I accept your apology. But I've moved on, and you should too." I turned and went back inside, quietly closing the door. 5 days have passed since that night. Nick texted me once to say he was taking Brett to his first Gamblers Anonymous meeting. I thanked him, but didn't ask for more. Matt and I are planning a weekend getaway soon. Somewhere coastal, peaceful. I've changed my email. Told HR to notify me if Susan ever shows up again. My life now, it's not perfect, but it's mine. My apartment finally feels like home. There are plants in the windowsill, a thrifted coffee table. Matt and I sanded and painted ourselves bookshelves, framed art candles that smell like vanilla and second chances. Work is challenging. Yes, but I'm growing, I'm trusted, I'm leading teams now, and Matt, he's calm in the chaos, gentle in the moments I start to spiral. Never once has he made me feel like I had to earn love by becoming someone else. Last night we really talked about moving in together when his lease ends. It wasn't a dramatic conversation. No, what are we, panics? Just two people looking at the same map, quietly choosing the same direction. I think that's what healing really looks like. Not some fireworks moment, not revenge, not even closure in the traditional sense, just choosing yourself over and over until it becomes second nature. And now when I think about Susan's voice in that final voicemail, the one where she accused me of abandoning Brett out of pride, I don't feel angry. I feel relieved. Because I didn't abandon him. I saved myself. I used to think I needed to be chosen to feel worthy. Now I know I choose me. If you were me, what would you have done? Would you have let him back in? Would you have believed her, tears his regret, or would you have done what I did? Closed the door and finally walked forward.